whole sound.
Australia got its own sound in the 60s. From the migrant heartbeat of the suburbs.
That is nothing short of an obscenity.
Over the airwaves came its rebellious call, and soon the whole world was listening.
This could be our next big band.
You just feel it.
They were a machine.
This is it, folks.
It's the sound.
Over the top.
It was the sound of a generation, born from a musical family.
Alberts.
Alberts again.
The sound that killed the cultural cringe.
And are you going to change your style much?
We ain't going to change for nobody.
The Albert sound. An Australian sound. In the 60s, there was one man who thought it was possible, who quietly produced this loud music into being.
He had this thing about putting Australia on the map musically, you know.
Sometimes looked like an undercover policeman trying to be groovy, you know.
He didn't live the rock and roll life.
Ted was very serious, a very polite man, a guy that wore a tie.
Ted Albert was born into a musical dynasty. The Alberts' empire was built on publishing the American songbook. But Ted had a rebel's dream. He wanted Australia to have its own modern songbook.
For Teddy, I think it was what made him get up in the morning, really. Music was just a very big part of his life.
He would nurture a wild bunch of migrant working-class kids into a musical dynasty. And together they would create a sound that would capture the world.
He didn't seem to be a person who crumbled under cannon fire.
He said, I love your sound. I love what you do. I thought, Jesus, here's a bloke that looks like he could be running a bank. And I just thought, he understands. He gets it.
Ted became a board member of the Alberts Company at age 25. And in his first meeting, he began his life's work.
Board Minutes, 1963. Mr. Ted Albert said he would like the company to begin to produce records and to explore the idea of an Australian sound of popular music.
There wasn't much to explore in 1963. Our parents' taste in music had never been so bad. But somehow, Ted saw the change that was coming. What he didn't know was that same year a family had arrived in Sydney with a new sound in its blood. And their stories were about to intertwine. They came from the working-class streets of Glasgow. Three of the greatest guitarists and songwriters in music history from the one family, George, Malcolm, and Angus Young. They hailed from the post-war scheme of Cranhill. It was a tough place to grow up. But the Youngs never forgot where they came from.
You've got to remember at this time, Glasgow has the coal industry, it has the shipyards, the air is thick and black, and it's into this atmosphere that the Young family kind of thrives in many ways because they're tough. And there's a lot of them. You know, there really is that clan mentality. Blood is everything.
William and Margaret Young put 8 children onto those mean streets. Music ran in the blood.
The whole family are musical. Their family was like my family in Liverpool. I'm from one of 10. 6 sisters and 4 brothers. The Youngs are from, I think, 1 of 50. They're terrible. There was people everywhere. You didn't know which one was the Young.
For the youngest of the youngs, Angus, it meant he had plenty of music teachers.
Each brother I had kind of would show you a little bits of, you know, music or what they liked. And even my oldest brother, Stevie, was trying to put me behind the piano, trying to show him, no, you do it like this with these fingers. You play this way, you know.
The big freeze of 1963 was the worst winter on record. The snow was 8 feet deep. At the same time, an ad appeared on the telly offering a different life.
Come over to the sunny side now. Australia, a great place for families.
Australia was being sold to the British public as a paradise. They've never had snow in Australia. It never rains in Australia. You have Christmas Day on the beach.
You could be on your way to a sunnier future in the new year.
The ad tipped the balance. The Youngs opted for Australia. The Crown Hill School yearbook records the day they left. 15 of the Youngs left Scotland, bound for Botany Bay. 7-year-old Angus promptly vomited on arrival.
So we gets off the plane in Sydney. I looks around and I says to my wife, there's not a soul in this country knows me. It's a weird feeling, no friends, no one.
Drummer Snowy Fleet arrived from Liverpool with his wife and daughter around the same time.
Got on a bus and my missus going, oh, look at the palm trees, aren't they nice? You know, and all it was all beautiful. But as we drove out of the city and we started to get in the bush, we didn't know where we were. And all I could hear were all these things making noises, crickets and God knows what. I thought, we're in the jungle. You know, it was that bad.
The young family were wondering why they'd left their beloved Scotland. Sydney rained for 6 solid weeks after the Youngs arrived. They would wake to find snakes in their dry bedding, escaping the wet floor of their new home.
It's been suggested that bad weather makes people moody and irritable. But is that an excuse for a punch-up?
By day, the Aussies came round looking for a fight. When he wasn't scrapping with the locals, the 5th son, 16-year-old George Young, was playing music in the hostel's wash house. He met a brilliant lead guitarist from Holland, whose name he couldn't pronounce. Johannes Vandenberg became Harry Vander, thanks to George. The Australia they'd landed in was primed for rebellion. In 1963, a third of the country was under 20. Kids everywhere were ready to explode.
I can't get no satisfaction.
All they needed was a soundtrack.
I think the adults criticise us all the time, and they forget that once they were young, they like to do crazy things too. They just criticise us, but because we're trying to have a bit of fun.
Alberts was the last company you'd expect to deliver the soundtrack of a generation. The company founder, Jacques Albert, hailed from Fribourg, Switzerland, a civilised, tidy town. Oddly quiet, this birthplace of a rock and roll dynasty. Jacques had emigrated to Sydney with nothing but his young family and the clothes on his back. His young wife died, but J. Albert and Son went on to flourish. Almost a century later, the company headquarters still felt a little old school. FIFA Riccobono was just 16 when she started as a secretary. One day, she would run the company.
All of this was so alien to me, and they had all these beautiful old paintings of, like, Frank Albert and his father Jacques, the founder, and they used to just be behind you in the accounts department, and they'd be just staring at you. And it was this really eerie feeling that you were being looked at.
Behind the decor, Ted Albert was plotting revolution, and he now had a green light from the board. The company would sign artists write and produce records aimed at capturing the new rock and roll audience. It was Ted's chance to put his stamp on the old firm.
Quite amazing when you think that their biggest selling things when Ted took over was the Boomerang Songbook and the harmonicas, you know, and here we are with the Beatles and everything else going on around you. Who the hell wants a songbook and a harmonica?
Well, I get up in the morning, get something to eat now. Or I go to work, I just go to. I come home in the evening and go still in bed. Got a man that got what you gonna do? Now that I'm sick and tired for that, now we do what I know now.
Ted's first signing was Billy Thorpe and the Aztecs, who took their manager's mum along to help clinch the deal.
In those days, you didn't really understand the way it worked. You just wanted to be a pop star. You wanted girls to scream at you when you went out. You wanted to be famous, and you wanted a #1 hit record. That's it. Whoever could bring you that, yeah, I'll sign there.
When the Beatles toured Australia in 1964, Thorpe and the Aztecs kept the Beatles from the #1 spot in the charts, an unimagined feat for an Australian band.
I'm telling you, pop that jive. Don't wanna find yourself outside on the track. What you gonna
They were still dressing British while sounding American, but change was on the way.
Ted did just have this uncanny knack for picking a hit. He listened to a lot of the music coming out of overseas, so he was very keyed into what was happening.
Out on the edge of suburbia, the sound Ted was searching for was coming together. George and Harry had found a baby-faced singer who had a gift for a catchy lyric. Now all they needed was a drummer.
He put a note on my door. He said, "You're from Liverpool, I believe you play the drums." They played me the music that they was used to. I said, "How about some of the stuff that I was listening to in Liverpool?" I brought all my records out. Played, showed it, and George went, "Yes." He loved the beat, George.
They called themselves the Easy Beats, and within months they were playing big gigs like Surf City in King's Cross.
Thank you. Hello.
That's our manager.
Oh, yes.
They hired a real estate agent for a manager in 1964. Mike Vaughan had one priceless connection.
We've just made ourselves a good deal.
He knew Ted Albert. The Easy Beats were invited down to Radio 2 UW Theatre to audition for Mr. Albert.
We were told to be on our best behaviour because this was a gentleman that was coming to see us. Not the sort of bloke that you swear in front of, you know what I mean? Well, not at least the first meeting, you know? And for us, it was like a proper performance in front of Ted. I mean, everything hung on it as far as we were concerned, you know?
It was the meeting of two clans for the Youngs and the Alberts.
Ted was down on his hands and knees tinkering with microphones and just doing all sorts of things, playing with the music, and George really clocked that.
A close bond began that day, forged over music.
He was a man who had a very extraordinary understanding of sound and how it worked. And I think all the way back then, that relationship between Ted and the Easy Beats was really born.
The fuse was lit for some of the greatest music Australia would ever produce, written and performed by 16-year-old kids.
#1 in riffs that you can't play without a cheeky smile on your face. Even when you play it wrong.
She's So Fine had all the ingredients of the new Australian sound. A formula that would define the Easy Beats and reach its zenith in AC/DC.
But I've loved that woman like I never before. 'Cause
killer riff that hooked you from the start. A guitarist who could summon the heavens. And a singer who discharged a casual air of rebellion.
You look at a singer and a performer like that and you think, he's having infinitely more fun than anyone else, and I want to be that guy.
It was the soundtrack young Australia had been waiting for. Easy Fever began.
We've done a show in Perth. We had 8,000 kids at the airport. And it was like that no matter where we went in Australia. Hotels, you go into your hotel after the show and you open a cupboard door and 6 chicks would fall out. And it was all of that. Stephen had someone posted herself to Stephen in a box.
Yeah, they've got real good sound. I think they're fantastic. Oh, I simply adore little Stevie. Yes, it's only 17, they write their own records. Yeah. Oh, they're the most fantastic group in Australia, I think.
How do they compare with the Beatles?
Oh, they're better by millions.
Oh, no,
they're better by millions.
Australia became their oyster. There was a special chemistry at work. A band who could ignite the fire, teamed with a producer who could fan the flames. Ted Albert was convinced Australian music sounded too soft, and he produced the Easy Beats loud.
He said, I want to play you something, and can you tell me honestly what you think about it? And this song came out through these huge speakers. The whole office shook. And he said, what do you think? I said, Ted, you and I both know that we've just listened to an absolute, certain #1 hit record. And this big smile came out of his face, and it was Sorry by the Easy Beats.
Had a date with her.
Sorry was the first Australian single recorded with feedback before the Beatles or the Stones. Fame chased them. A magazine had published where the young family lived in Burwood, causing a house invasion.
They trampled youngster Malcolm trying to get at George.
When 10-year-old Angus came home, it was mayhem.
I just saw all these people. I saw police because they kind of barricaded it off. And I was trying to explain to a policeman, I'm saying, you know, I live there. Can I get in my house? And the policeman said, yeah, they're all saying that, fella, you know.
Only a year out of Villawood Migrant Hostel, their lives had been transformed. The Easy Beats were ready to take on the world. Ted agreed to back them. He sent Easy Beats manager Mike Vaughan to New York to score a worldwide record deal. Mike stayed with Aussie journalist Lillian Roxon, who fell in love with the Easy Beats and with Mike's mission.
The suspense is killing me. Will this simple, unspoilt young man from Strathfield, New South Wales swing the biggest deal in Australian showbiz history and become the new Brian Epstein? Will the Easy Beats show the Yanks what music really is? Or will they fade away into obscurity in North Cunnamulla?
On the last day of the trip, Mike Vaughan signed a contract with United Artists. The Easy Beats would record at the legendary Abbey Road Studios in London. Ted Albert would produce. the boys had a ticket to ride. They were poised on the edge of greatness.
In the pop business, particularly in the 60s, the holy grail was to make it in swing in London. And of course, George being as he is, the leader of the group, and this incredible desire to always go further, that's where we're going to go.
They left Australia as heroes, vowing not to compromise the sound they had created.
And are you going to change much with your style of music in the pop world?
No, it will be an Australian sound. We'll definitely try to get our own sound. Not a Beatles sound, our Rolling Stones sound.
It was a golden place and time to be in a band. A youth revolution was in play. All the world's talented musicians were heading there.
The London scene was so great. You know, I could literally fall out of my door and go and see Ike and Tina Turner. I think I was sweated on by Tina Turner.
The Yeezys had left Australia to mass hysteria. Now, they were nobodies.
There was hundreds of bands, all wanting a microphone. What can we contribute to all of this? How can we make ourselves so different?
And we did everything possible to sort of fit in fast and sort of, you know, and come up with a hit.
Ted flew in from Oz, and sessions began at Abbey Road. This was going to be their international breakthrough. But for the first time, Ted and the Easy Beats didn't deliver a hit. United Artists thought the songs were way too simple, and they blamed Ted.
It was just a different game. It wasn't Australia anymore. You know, they were now trying to impress the world, and it was quite elusive trying to find the big hit that was needed.
The record company decided a new producer was the answer. So Ted flew home, and a new chapter began.
I imagine that would have been hard for him because I think he was so inextricably intertwined with everything the Easy Beats had done, the surge, the energy, the sound of them.
But Ted wasn't the type to wallow in self-pity. Back in Sydney, his search for an Australian sound continued as he signed and recorded caveman rockers The Throb and The Missing Links.
So we were out there, donk, yeah, thumping and bashing.
Ted produced them into the charts.
I mean, we were arguably the first long-haired band in Australia, and it wasn't, you look at far, it wasn't that long, but we used to get chased out of suburbs with irate mobs.
To come out with Billy Thorpe as the first one, and The Missing Links and The Throb and the Easy Beats, how fantastic is that? You know, at a time when you're just starting something brand new.
Ted sent money to London, where the Easy Beats were being put through the ringer. They were told a more sophisticated sound was needed for the UK market, and Stevie Wright's lyrics were too naive. George had to tell his friend Stevie that he would no longer be writing songs with him, that it would be Harry Vanda from now on.
We were expected to write a hit song. So Harry and I, we locked ourselves in this room for 3-4 months to write a hit song.
Hitmaker Shel Talmy, who worked with the Kinks and The Who, took over as producer.
George took his gear down and played all the tapes. And the guy came on, nah. Have you got anything else? So George said, I've got this little riff I'm working on. 3, 4. Just a riff, nothing else. Went in, no lyrics, just a riff. And he went, I like that. Go away and finish it and bring it back. And let me hear it finished.
George and Harry were struggling to nail it, so they went to the pictures. The pre-feature was a short about an a cappella group called the Swingle Singers.
All this stuff. And George went, wow. Went back, and that's where the doo-doo-doos come from. George had nailed it.
Monday
Monday morning feels so bad. Everybody seems to nag.
Went back to see this guy and said, what do you think of this? He went, beautiful, let's record it. We went in the studio a while after. We took one take on it, one take. He went, right, next. We're all going, was that it? One take it was, and he done it.
Friday on My Mind was released on October 14th, 1966, along with 63 other singles that came out that same day.
She looks fine tonight. She's out of sight to me.
The BBC initially overlooked it. Pirate radio stations championed it, where a good many Aussie DJs worked. Finally, through November, it started to climb the charts. They were to support the Four Tops, Cream, the Rolling Stones, and the frenzy began again.
The chicks went ballistic. This big woman ran out and she dived straight on top of me. And she said, I've got you down, but I don't know what to do with you. I said, well, think of something. I wasn't getting up. I said, no way, I'm staying here. They brought the curtain down. We couldn't play, they brought the curtain down. Now, this is unbelievable. You know, this is England. This is not Australia, this is England.
Friday gave the Easy Beats Around the World ticket to fame. On the jukebox at Max's Kansas City, the coolest club in the world, Lou Reed played the Easy Beats every night.
It just fell together like a dream, you know, like that doesn't happen every day.
Everything about it is just brilliant. It was kind of their Bohemian Rhapsody.
Amidst the mayhem, George wrote to his brothers back home.
Dear Mal and Angus, we're having a pretty crazy time here. Great to hear that Friday has gone to #1 in Australia. It's top 20 in the good old USA, where we are now. It's meant our lives have been pretty wild.
News of George's success was music to Ted Albert's ears, but he was already laying plans for the next generation of Youngs. When he visited the family home one day, he heard something that caught his attention.
My father said, oh, the heads of their record companies coming, you better all behave, you know, so you'd be very kind of quiet and, you know. And Ted was quite a tall man and we were all very small, so you were all kind of looking like this, you know. And he said, I heard some guitar playing. And my father said, oh, that's the two boys who'll be playing away. And you know. So, and Ted said to my dad, if they ever want to do something, send them to me.
Ted wasn't just nurturing rock talent. He was also looking for pop. But he looked in different places. When a backhoe operator called Ted Mulry appeared with a guitar and a love song, he was welcomed to the family.
Ted Mulry wandered into Albert's off the back of his backhoe. He brought in his own song, Julia, which was a great success.
Julia went to #5 in the charts in 1969. The first of 7 top 10 singles Mulry would record with the Alberts. Back in London, the Easy Beats set their minds to what comes after Friday.
So now we're in a position to be internationally recognized. And now that this is so, we can start to write music that could set a trend.
Ted Albert dispatched the then 21-year-old budding filmmaker Peter Clifton to capture George and Harry's efforts for a follow-up hit.
I wanted drama, and when they started recording Heaven and Hell, and they did the high sweet note for heaven and the deep bass ugly note for hell, I could tell then on my handheld cameras, by going one to the other, this was a perfect metaphor for rock and roll.
Listen, try and get more jangly effect. Very heavenish. It doesn't sound like heaven.
As they struggled to find a new popular sound, Clifton recorded the drama.
Heaven is in your eyes. The moon. No, Stephen. Try and make it. Try and make it sound beautiful.
Their heart was in writing simple rock and roll R&B based songs, and the kind of classic mistake that most bands make is, as the rest of the world changes, you change your music. I mean, the Beatles were obviously becoming more complex, and so everyone, I guess, thought, well, maybe we should show that we can do the same thing.
Started to change our style. We got more complicated, got far more diverse, all that sort of stuff.
They tried everything from reggae to psychedelia, to what George later described as cornball schmaltz shit, trying to keep up the momentum of Friday on My Mind.
We gave him Hello, How Are You, which was like, a soggy bloody ballad. By this time, nobody knew who the damn Easy Beats were, And then there was Jimi Hendrix doing his thing and all that, so, we were toast.
Australian music's greatest band had been pulled in so many different directions and had been ripped off by so many promoters that they called it a day. It was time to come home.
Roll sound. Steve, how have things been in England over the last couple of years?
How do you mean, how have things been?
Well, since you were in Australia in '67, how's the group progressed since then?
Progressed?
Yeah.
Well, being in England, we've taken in a lot of influences. Alcohol.
As they started their last tour to pay off their debts, they released a song that showed everyone how brilliant they could be.
And this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go to you.
Good times would become the motto for Albert's music in the decades to come. As the Easy Beats disbanded, Harry made sure the next generation would continue what they'd started, handing down his beloved Gretsch Firebird to George's younger brother, Malcolm.
It was a nice guitar, but I didn't use it a lot. And Mel, the bloody thing he was playing was falling apart, it's terrible. I said, Jesus Christ. And then he was, and he was such a hot little player anyway, so I thought, well, he deserves a good guitar, So here it is. Best investment I ever made. What can I say? If I'd known that, I would have given him more than one.
Ted had his ear on the future too.
He gave Mal a tape recorder, and Mal would get like a couple of cardboard boxes and say, right, you just bang this when I tell you. So I'd have to try and tap along, and he'd go, now, try and keep time, for him. Yeah. So, he used it well. So he got a lot of his early ideas, fiddling about with that tape recorder.
George and Harry returned to London to try their hand at becoming songwriters for hire. Ted Albert knew he hadn't heard the last of them.
Look, we had a few rough years in London where we, you know, really had to pull all stops out to make the rent, you know. And so we did sessions, we did anything.
Ted helped them set up a small studio. And for 4 years, the pair wrote songs and absorbed the 70s London music scene. Outsiders, sure, but they were learning how this world worked and sending songs home. Ted realised that Harry and George could write and produce great pop music, which he needed to make Alberts a success. And so a new idea began to dawn.
We were getting a lot of experience as writers by being the all-rounders that it did make us. We got to a point where, you know, are you on a jazz song? Sure, here's your jazz song. You know, oh, you want a really gooey ballad? Sure, here's, you know. Are you on a rock song? Bang, you know. We got really good at that.
In Sydney, Ted Mulry needed another hit.
It's everywhere.
Ted Albert had him try out one of George and Harry's demos. Singer and song connected immediately.
Falling in love again. Falling in love again. I lost my heart again.
And the production was Ted Albert back to his brilliant best, complete with sitar.
It's what to do and where to go.
It wasn't the raw rock sound he'd been forging, but it was perfect radio fodder.
Falling in love again. Falling in love again. I lost my
Falling in Love Again went to the top of the charts in the summer of '71. It was the beginning of a rich vein for Alberts, George and Harry's clever pop side.
I lost my heart again in a wonderful world of my own.
Writing a really good pop song that stays around for more than 7 seconds is not easy. It takes real skills. And they got onto something in their pop period which was unbelievable. It was almost like the light and the shade, the yin and the yang, and it was both coming out of this one place, Alberts.
The songs were lining up. They just needed the singers. So Ted sent producer Simon Napier Bell into the Sydney and Melbourne clubs to find some.
Superman was born and came into my life like a fire.
For an early George and Harry soul classic called Superman, they found session singer Alison McCullum.
I know I'm gonna have to get you trying just as hard as I can to get my Superman. Oh, Superman, yes I am. I'm gonna make you love me.
It went top 10 in early '72.
A lot of times, songs come up that really don't suit anybody, so they just sit on the shelf until somebody turns up who can sing them.
Alberts had already tried a few singers on a ballad called Pasadena, before Napier Bell met another Glaswegian called Young.
Such a long, long way to Pasadena.
He hadn't even heard him sing, but he had an eye for a good-looking chap and lucked out on the pop vocalist of a generation.
I went to Alberts the next day with my blue overalls on, my hair down to my ass. I looked like I'd been dragged out of a rubbish bin. And I can still see Ted Albert's face when he sort of looked at Simon Napier Bell and gone, what have you got here? What have you dragged in? And that was when he sat behind the piano and started playing Pasadena, and I nearly fainted. I just thought, what? You want me to sing that? He said, yes, but in a very special way.
Ooh, such a long, long way to Pasadena.
Gave me the demo and he said, I don't want to hear that other guy singing, which happened to be George Young. So I had to put the vocal exactly on top. And right at the end, actually, George is there singing it. So in actual fact, my first single was a duet.
The Albert stable of artists was building, and Ted gave a young Fifa Riccobono the task of looking after them. She would get their music onto radio, TV, and concerts. Fifa became the first female executive in Australian rock and roll history and learned to be just as tough as the boys.
I don't think there was one day that I didn't enjoy. I loved the fights I used to have to get into, especially if I won. And I knew that Ted was there, you know, as my backup. And when things didn't go right, he didn't, you know, lose it.
Ted was gathering his forces, but more than any artist, he wanted his key generals around him. As George and Harry neared the end of their rope in London, Ted threw them a lifeline that would change the course of our musical history.
Ted still hadn't given up on his dream of establishing this production company and music house that was going to set the world on fire, you know. And he actually wanted to go in business with us. And so he was thinking, so how am I going to get these guys back to Australia? Well, he made us an offer we couldn't refuse.
It was a handshake deal. No lawyers, no signatures, just a shared understanding. George and Harry returned to Sydney in 1973 with production nous and the studio tans to match. They would run the new Albert studio, find and produce talent, and split the profits equally with Ted. They later said it was like falling into a gold mine.
I'd go down to the studio, and the studio was very dark, dimly lit, 2 orange lampshades, with George and Harry smoking, and I'd sit on the back lounge, and you couldn't see for smoke.
You work during the night, don't you?
Well, not through choice.
Not through choice.
What hour do you usually start?
Midnight.
Music's 5 parts sweat and 5 parts fairy dust, and they really had the sweat stuff down well. I mean, this was a place where you worked.
From years of working together, the differences in George and Harry's personalities melded into their songs.
It's like heart and soul. George is the heart, Harry's the soul. And so George is an absolute machine. You know, George could look at an ashtray and make it play music. And that was the way, you know, George would push ahead and push ahead. Harry tended to be a bit more laid back, sitting back there, rolling his drum cigarette. But where he was fantastic was he was the soul. When it came to feel, when it came to melodies, that's where Harry came in.
The music scene in Australia had been hijacked by hippies in George and Harry's absence.
Unfortunately, then something called flower power came up. It was all about, amen, you know.
Albert's music was about to leave the hippies eating dust. The teeny fans of pop had started to drink beer and fight. Once again, they were primed for rebellion.
Harry and George had seen it all. They knew the highest of the highs and the lowest of the lows, and they set about doing it in a different way. They'd learned from some of their mistakes, and they developed this model with Ted Albert and Alberts as a continuation of what the Easy Beats could have been. They were going to produce something that really was something, and ultimately, of course, that was Acca Dacca.
The next milestone on the road to AC/DC was the side project they'd begun in London, the Marcus Hook Roll Band. And it brought Angus and Malcolm Young together to record for the first time with their mentors.
What do they do for you? Science fiction.
George had got Mal in a couple of times doing stuff. And then he rung up home and he said, is Angus there? Tell him to get his guitar and come in the studio. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. And then George shows me a couple of licks of his riff that he wants to play. And I'm kind of trying to quickly learn it, and George just goes, okay, roll tape, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you're away. And by the time I've learned this riff, it's near the end of the song, you know.
For years, George had boasted that his little brothers were better guitarists than anyone. Now was their chance to prove it.
George is a very self-assured guy. But if there were two guys even more self-assured than George, even tougher than George, even more defiant than George, it was Malcolm and Angus.
On a creative high from the Marcus Hook record, Harry and George approached their biggest project yet. It was a case of unfinished business for the Alberts family, the rock revival of Little Stevie Wright. After the demise of the Easy Beats, Stevie's career had faltered.
Stevie was pretty mixed up, and, you know, he'd never really gotten over the fact that he'd been displaced as the songwriter with George by Harry. There was a lot of stuff there.
Ted Albert knew Stevie was still the best rock frontman Australia had ever seen. It was time to re-establish their prodigal son. Harry and George set to work with him, and they came up with a riff that had such swagger, it would stop the country in its tracks.
George and Harry had Stevie in the studio, and they started working with him. And Stevie was very much wanting to get back into the limelight, and he loved it. He lived to perform.
I got some money in my pocket. I got the cockies in my hand. I got myself a couple of tickets to see a rock and rollin' band. Come on, girl, just get on your shoes. We're gonna hear some sounds. Come on, babe, you know there ain't no time to mess around. Evie, let your hair hang down.
It was bogan Motown, Australia at its toughest and coolest. And Stevie Wright was just the man to sing us our song. Over the AM radio, the suburbs rocked to Australian music like never before.
Oh, I thought it was a smash. It was revolutionary. And I mean, Harry and George, that was when they really hit their peak as producers and songwriters.
At the time of its release, Evie Part 1, 2 and 3 was over 11 minutes long, the longest single ever produced.
I don't think any of us really thought that the stations would all play 11.25 minutes of it, and they did. And it was, you know, top of the charts for 3/4 of a year.
It was a triumphant reboot for George, Harry and Stevie. Flouting the rule book gave Alberts the biggest hit single in Australian history.
What a surprise. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Alberts, who put me back in business again, and the guys that wrote Evie. And a big hand for Harry and George, Harry Vander and George Young. Thank you very much, everybody here, too.
We played with Stevie Wright and his band when I was still a student at university and trying to figure out how to play rock and roll. And they were brilliant, you know, they were a fantastic band, but Stevie, to get himself going, jumped out of the car about 2 minutes before they were due to go on and smashed his head about 3 times up against the concrete pillar and then bounced on a stage with 3 handstands and a cartwheel and, you know, you got the party up, 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 and I sort of went, wow, surely I don't have to do that every night. It was memorable.
Stevie's album, Hard Road, promised to be a world beater. It was licensed in the US and UK, and artists like Rod Stewart covered songs from it. Stevie's next hit single cemented the Alberts' guitar sound. Like George's guitar from the Easy Beats, but harder, tougher. It now had a primal urgency, goading the listener to take it on. It was George's younger brother, Malcolm, who stepped up to play rhythm for Stevie on the recording. He was the raw sound of things to come.
Malcolm was very gifted. He was just confident, solid player guitar.
Off the back of Hard Road and Black Eyed Bruiser, Stevie performed to sold-out crowds in America and Europe and seemed unstoppable. But behind the success, Stevie's manager, Michael Chugg, was keeping a terrible secret from the Alberts family.
One night I went down to the studio and they were doing the vocals for Black Eyed Bruiser. And I walked past the recording, the vocal booth, and he was doing Smack and then singing. So I walked in the studio and I said to Harry and George, I've had enough of this, come here. And we walked around and they saw what was going on. I just couldn't do it anymore. We had a real shot, like a real shot. He could have been a superstar.
It was kind of heady days, and I was wrestling with my own devils at the time.
Stevie's addiction spelled the end of his recording career with Alberts.
He was so close, and we were so close twice. And he was almost about to get what he wanted, and it just fell over.
After years of struggle to get free of addiction, Stevie returned for the biggest concert in Australian history, the concert of the decade, and blew everyone away.
Must be a better way to say the things I feel, the love I only know with you.
When I first seen Stephen at Sydney Opera House, all those people, as far as I could see, I was so proud of him. That's the Stephen I work with, that's the Stephen I know. But today, I cannot listen to Evie. I try, I'm getting upset thinking about it. Gotta stop. Okay, can I leave that now?
I'm nothing without you. And Evie, the sun is shining now.
It was Stevie's bravest and greatest moment.
My eyes are open now. I see so much I never knew.
That was our family. Everybody came into that. And it was a big time for Stevie. It was really all happening.
I wanna thank you now.
I do remember, it was just incredible to me. 1 minute we're sort of knocking about the hobbles of Sydney, just trying to get a break. I was close to 16, and next thing I got a father figure. Ted was like Brian Epstein of Australian music. And the next minute, I'm appearing in front of 500,000 people.
much in love with you.
The Alberts musical family had come so close to cracking it overseas. But Ted Albert's work wasn't over. Waiting in the wings was the next generation.
He said, you've got to put AC/DC on. I said, who are they? And he said, George and Harry's young brothers. So we put AC/DC on at the Opera House as the opening act. And there began that story.
They would be signed by Alberts in 1974, with a 16-year-old Angus Young on lead guitar and a frontman every bit as wild as little Stevie Wright. With older brother George and Harry Vander at the helm, AC/DC were determined to prevail where the easy beats had fallen.
They were there to give everything they'd learned during their run in the 60s to this band that were going to take on the world in the 70s.
Keep it real. Keep it direct. Don't go pretending you're something you're not. Be who you are, mate. And that's what AC/DC, that became their calling card. That became their ace up their sleeve. And for that, Malcolm and Angus absolutely have George Young to thank.
The clan would have their day. Their bagpipes called the charge. The Alberts sound was about to storm the barricades. It started with the easy beats conquering the teeny boppers in the innocent 60s. Australian rock and roll on the brink of worldwide fame. But in the 70s, everything changed. The hippie wave rolled in and then out. All that was left was an endless recession and a lot of young people who were over the bullshit. A tough, new generation of Australians was looking for its sound. One man would lead the charge. He wanted to take the raw Australian guitar sound to the world. He would build a musical dynasty. This is how it happened. This is the story of blood and of thunder. In 1973, songwriters Harry Vander and George Young returned to Australia. It was the start of a new era as they reunited with their mentor, studio boss Ted Albert. From the ashes of the Easy Beats, this unlikely partnership had unfinished business.
As a continuation of what the Easy Beats could have been, they were going to produce something and deliver it to the rest of the world.
How do you nurture talent? Be trusted implicitly in George and Harry's judgment, because they were the eldest sons. And I thought, you know, that's a clever man, a clever father.
When you went up to Albert's in King Street, there were these two young immigrant guys that had the latest technology, everything they wanted to do what they wanted to do, which is to write and produce songs. So they were given an incredible opportunity, but also they delivered. I mean, they delivered like no one else.
The next 10 years would belong to Alberts as they nurtured a family of local talent and dominated the Australian charts. But it didn't stop at our shores. This was the decade when the Australian sound captured the world. It all started in the grotty, sticky pubs of the suburbs.
We played at the White Horse Inn in Victoria, and there was guys bashing their head on the edge of the stage. I saw one guy bite the corner out of a jug.
They can be frustrating audiences to play to because they're hammered. A room full of alcoholics, it's very difficult to make any sense to them.
The only language this crowd understood was volume, and the guitars did the shouting.
When you play in the pubs in this country, you get that big, fat, straight, four on the floor, as they call it, eights, boom, boom, bang, boom, boom, that thing, right? Because in a pub, you'd have 2,000 people absolutely packed. It's so hot, everyone's sweating, you're sweating. You've got to get them off. They're all pissed.
Australian culture at the time was raw. It was pretty raw in the pubs. And so that sound of a guitar, with not much else on it, but plenty of grunt behind it, worked very well in those places.
George and Harry could sense an opportunity.
When we first heard the rock bands in Australia, I heard some stuff on the radio, and I thought, that's not very good, is it? This is like, it all sounded squashed and horrible, you know what I mean? Like, no life in it. And then we went around to clubs and the pubs and started to look at, you know, like, started to look at some of the guys, and all of a sudden, that's not the same band that's on record, you know? I mean, these guys were great. They were rocking their asses off. They said, well, that's how you got to record these guys.
It became their mission to capture that raw guitar sound on record. Luckily for them, the answer was right under their noses. George Young knew that his little brothers, Malcolm and Angus, had something special that they could nurture.
George always talked to me and Mal. We were his kid brothers. Still does, you know. He still talks to you like you. Well, he says it himself. He goes, geez, I always think of you as 15, you know. So oh, thanks.
Okay, people, we're going to have a rave-up. We'd like to do the Payday song. Friday on my mind.
Angus, the seventh son of William and Margaret Young, always wanted to be a guitar hero. He'd grown up watching older brother George and Uncle Harry Vander perform. He was intrigued by how they played the guitar.
They had a very good sound, you know. They had a kind of unique thing between him and Harry, you know. And Harry was probably doing a bit like what I do with, same with as Malcolm, you know. You know, George had that very hard rhythm, and you know, Harry provided, you know, the highlights, the kind of color. So, yeah, you know, there's a big similarity.
By the time they hit their teens, Malcolm and Angus were already mean guitarists. Older sister Margaret came up with the name AC/DC from a sign on the family sewing machine. Angus was still at school, but Malcolm, the band leader, let him loose on lead guitar. They had a bulletproof conviction they were going to be huge.
A friend and I went and saw AC/DC at the Deacon Inn one Wednesday or Thursday night, and we were about 6 people in the audience.
Ted had been watching the boys for years and signed them in 1974. In the next year, they went through 2 drummers, 3 bass players, and 3 managers. But it was the new singer that got the motor running. It's hard to believe that among this company of dags lurked the future frontman of the biggest hard rock band on earth. But that's Bon Scott, with the twinkle in his eye, miming backup vocals on a Vander and Young song for the Valentines in 1969.
The Valentines with My Old Man's a Groovy Old Man. Vince,
thanks very much.
Welcome back to the program.
Bon was considerably older. He was more experienced. He'd, been in fraternity. He'd also been in pop groups in the 60s. He'd had a measure of success. And he'd kind of blown it. His career had petered out. He'd had a terrible motorcycle accident not long before. He was down on his luck.
At 28, Bon was working as a roadie in Adelaide when AC/DC rolled into town.
They just found him hugely entertaining because he didn't give a shit, but really didn't give. And finally, one night, after some bust-up with Dave Evans, their original singer, they invite Bon to come on and kind of audition. And famously, Bon did a gram of coke, drank a bottle of whiskey, put his wife's knickers on his head, and just ran around the stage like a lunatic and entertained the hell out of the audience.
George Young described Bon as a toilet wall poet. His bawdy lyrics would become the perfect foil for the fierce guitar sound of the Youngs. He was filthy, but he was funny. Ted Albert didn't judge artists on their appearance or their wild behaviour. To him, all that mattered was that Bon was right for the band.
Dr. Oliver Sacks said in his book, The Man That Mistook His Wife for a Hat, that judgment is the most important thing we have, that judgment defines our identity. And I think what Ted had was he had judgment and he backed it. And he had the money to back it, he had the machinery to back it, but he gambled on his instinct to pick talent.
Albert's enforcer, FIFA Riccobono, was in the crowd for Bon's first official gig at the Rockdale Masonic Hall in Sydney, 1974.
It was a full house, and I was really excited. And then he got up and he comes down the front of the stage, and he is so crass and so rude. And the crowd went berserk. They really liked it. And I thought, God, he's so good, but he's so bad.
From the start, the pubs loved them. Their producers got to know it firsthand. George and Harry brought AC/DC into the studio straight after the gigs to capture that raw pub energy.
You just had to give them a chance to perform, give them a chance to do it. Instead of, say, well, the needle must not go into the red. So that's how this so-called pub sound came about, because that's what it sounded like in the pubs.
The boys were bursting with raw energy and talent. George and Harry were born producers. It helped that George was their older brother.
Working with George and Harry, everything seems to be in his head for a lot of times, And because he'll take something you got, he'll go, well, let's hear what you got. And you play him your song, and he'll go, oh, let's try this that way. Yeah. And he's already crafting away in his head, and he'll go, no, let's change it. And I'll go, oh, wait a minute, that sounds good. It sounds great. And you go, no, we'll just try this. So he seems to just create things in his head.
Between them, they hit on a landmark sound. Rebellious and rocking, it would one day take on the world.
Wow, Bon's cheeky and he's trouble, and I want to be his mate. I mean, Angus is just this whirling dervish and just so beautiful. And Malcolm, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. His right hand is just... Oh.
For an audience sick of hard times, here was the cure. Suburban young Australia at full bore. The Albert sound would speak for them.
One of the things that's notable about the whole Albert stable in those days was we all had what they call the Australian pub rock sound, that big, fat, robust guitar sound. And it was very, very difficult to get the intensity of that onto tape. George and Harry were magicians at that.
Sometimes we would finish, late night in a club or something, and George would say, well, get you in the studio now, and we'd be doing, doing tracks. And, sometimes you could roll out of there at 4 in the morning, and then other times you might roll out at 1 o'clock in the day, and you'd been there all night.
After an all-nighter, their way to come down was to jump in a tinny and go fishing on the harbour. Ted Albert also loved the water. Sometimes they went out together. Now Harry and George had founded the Alberts rock sound. Ted set sail for the pop charts. It started with John Paul Young. They wrote a top 10 hit for him in 1975 about being yesterday's heroes.
When I walk down the streets, see the people who stop and stare and say, haven't I seen that face somewhere a long time ago?
It was George singing about his own experiences of leaving the Easy Beats and somehow the public still recognising him from somewhere but couldn't quite put their finger on it, and that happens to be now. It's great. People say, oh, you're don't tell me, and I say, no, I won't.
It was some strange wonder that the same company, with the same producers, in the same studio, could turn out AC/DC one day and JPY the next.
Jump in my car.
Ted Mulry wrote pop songs,
I wanna take you home.
but Albert's got them rocking.
Jump in my car. I wanna take you home.
The generals were watching,
It's too far to walk on your own.
and an army of fans was gathering.
Alberts were a fascination to a lot of the bands, and particularly us, because they just produced not only hits, but they produced a sound. There was magic there, and you felt it in there, but it wasn't to do with the equipment.
They started to build up, a portfolio of, titles that you could say, oh, they wrote that, they produced that, they wrote and produced that, they wrote and produced that, and very quickly they became the #1 writing team in Australia. Very quickly.
In the mid-70s, colour TV arrived, and with it, Countdown became the new battleground for popular music.
They gave us the Easy Beats. They gave us the brilliance of George and Harry. They then gave us John Paul Young, Ted Mulry, William Shakespeare was another one. And they not only gave it to the Australian public, they gave it to Countdown, and we loved it.
I left hook, come on.
Alberts was soon supplying 25% of the Countdown artists.
If it hadn't have been for Alberts, and I can absolutely safely say this, then Countdown only would have lasted, at the most, I reckon, 6 months.
When rock and roll's sister act Cheetah signed with Alberts, it was straight to work.
There was no ceremony when we actually signed the deal with Ted. And then we were scuttled straight downstairs to where George was waiting with a little keyboard in a very small room. And we just got straight into it. He said, sing this, and we sort of went straight into a few tunes. So I think he was probably sort of testing our guns vocally to see what we had there.
Looking after them was Fifa Riccobono, by the mid-70s, head of the Alberts stable of artists, the toughest woman in rock.
She could be ruthless and a piranha when she needed to be, and yet, she'd be standing there behind one of these holding a brush and a comb and a lip gloss, sticking it down her boot.
Well, she was just a tough Italian babe who was like the wall. You had to get through FIFA.
We were all really protective of each other. I mean, that was the whole family atmosphere. You know, outside was the rest of the world, but we were family.
At the head of the family was Ted Albert, whose leadership the troops believed in 100%.
Ted was instrumental in a lot of areas, you know, and being a very solid character. He didn't seem to be a person who crumbled under cannon fire, you know what I mean?
There was a siege mentality about the band, certainly. You know, I think that was come down the line from Angus and Malcolm, and indirectly George. You had to be on the team 250%, or you wouldn't be on the team at all.
AC/DC toured relentlessly, playing any shithole that would have them. From town halls to tin sheds, they battled bogans and pissheads with sheer sonic assault.
People would be throwing bottles, or they would be, you know, winking at the girls, and the girls' boyfriends would get all pissed off, and there were car chases. It was the Wild West.
But the sound and the songs they forged in the Albert studios were the perfect soundtrack for this wild colonial era.
This big fight started, and then one of the guys that were hanging around in the band got all excited, jumped up onto a table, and he reminded me of, you know, Sammy Sam, you know, with the two guns, 238s, he go bang, 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 bang through the roof. It's like, what the?
They just were like fearless. Angus was on the top of an amp. On the other side, there was Bon on another amp, and you go, God, he could kill himself.
They had a rock-solid conviction that every gig was leading them to greatness. It inspired an anthem of Australian rock, their battle cry.
Got very successful in probably the best way possible, which is to go out and not rely on radio airplay. It's simply one punter at a time, one audience at a time, hand-to-hand combat, you know, taking each hill as it comes. It's like a call to arms.
Soon they'd conquered every beer barn in the country. The battle plan rolled on. It was time for London.
Here we are at Mascot Airport to say farewell to AC/DC. Are you going over confident that you can take on an English market?
Yeah, well, we are confident. Yeah. We're not overconfident, but we are very confident.
Ted Albert was confident too. He had to be. Just like he did with the Easy Beats a decade before. Ted was digging deep to bankroll the campaign.
It's a long way to the top if you want to rock and roll.
This will only happen on countdown.
Whoa! Hey, come home with me.
Just before they left, Angus and Malcolm met another band of brothers, plugging the long way to the top.
We got to do 3 gigs with AC/DC in South Australia. And they said that they thought that it'd be great if we signed up with Alberts and that they would go back and tell Harry and George about us.
Every label in the country had passed on the Angels, but Alberts saw their potential.
Ted had a lot of vision when it came to seeing something in a very raw state. The uniqueness was always something to come up with something that was different to what other people had.
It doesn't matter who you are, we're all
The Angels certainly had something different. Getting it out of them was another thing. To nurture the family's next generation, George and Harry agreed it was time for their assistant, Mark Opitz, to step up and find the Angels' sound.
My God, me taking on a band, am I ready for it?
I don't know what I showed in my eyes at the time, but I was scared shitless. And so I said, yeah, of course yeah, of course I'll do it.
I was in Adelaide, and I was sitting in my car, actually, and I missed it. I didn't even have a guitar, but I heard it in my head, I Ain't the One.
Smokers choking in the smoking room, fishes in the fish tank. Sailors waiting for the tide to turn, shoot that ship sank.
And I just, oh my God, that's it. That's it. And that's how I was playing, and I was, you know, and I don't get really excited in the studio. But I'm jumping up and down, going, oh my God, that's it. This is it. This is what we're looking for, that the 8 feel. And so we then transposed that to many other songs in there that they'd written. Voila, we have the Angels.
I ain't the one, I ain't the one, I ain't the one to judge.
I Ain't the One was the first track recorded on the Angels' breakthrough album, Face to Face. And the songs kept coming.
We would record a track, we'd mix a track, we'd get George and Harry to have a listen, and if they liked it, then the final thing was to go upstairs to Ted. And he'd, I think, take a cassette of it and go down to his car and have a listen there as well.
Face to Face sold almost 300,000 copies in 1978. It catapulted the Angels to stardom. With AC/DC in England, the Angels were fast becoming one of the biggest bands in Australia, the rising sons of the Alberts family.
They just tapped into, you know, the rhythm of the suburbs, and they sang simply and directly, and the rhythms were there, and bang.
With 2 rock bands on top, Ted Albert decided to change gear. Time to dust off George and Harry as pop stars.
The morning was cold and lonely. City lights old and grey.
The song was called Hey St. Peter. And immediately, you know, Ted already like, hey baby, you know, get onto this. What are you going to do with it? And he says, well, we don't know. We can't find anybody to do this. He said, well, why don't you do it yourself?
Hey St. Peter shot to #1 in the Australian charts and made a big splash overseas.
The Hey St. Peter single was pretty big in Europe too, wasn't it? In Germany or somewhere?
Yeah, it did quite well over there. I think it's still knocking around the charts in some countries over there too.
Holland, Belgium, France, and all those places.
The B-side, Walking in the Rain, became an even bigger worldwide hit for Grace Jones 2 years later.
So they were 2 #1 straight away, which probably never would have seen the light of day if it hadn't been for Ted again, you know.
They were more than just a flash in the pan, because next it was time to create a new music genre. George and Harry's love of drum loops was taking them in a new direction.
In the studio at Albert's, you'd look on the wall and there'd be 3 or 4 nails with all these different lengths of tape hanging off them. That'd be all the different drummers they had.
Oh, babe, you left me standing in the rain while you were sitting down to dinner.
George would often play the drums and Harry record onto tape loop.
Drummers were a big frustration for George and Harry because in those days, it was very hard to get a drummer to play a straight beat, you know, no fills. It was like trying to get blood out of a stone, you know, asking a drummer to sit there, just play that beat for 4 minutes. And they go, chuck, 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 da-da-ba-ba. No, not da-da-da-da. But I feel like going da-da-da-da. Yeah.
While he was getting closer,
They were making tailor-made hits for the Albert artists.
It wasn't unusual to walk in and see George and Harry with tape hanging around their neck that they'd cut pieces, because we used to splice everything, take something out, but they'd never throw anything out until they were sure that they didn't need it anymore. And so you'd have little bits of China pencil on something and they'd be looking at pieces to stick back on, and you'd end up with tape all over the place, but they knew exactly what they were doing.
Their love of tape loops would lead them to invent Australian disco. It took Europe by surprise. In 1978, John Paul Young climbed the charts in Belgium, France, Holland and Germany with Standing in the Rain. On the other side of the channel, the great hopes of the Alberts business were now engaged in the battle for Britain.
Welcome to London. This is Doug Crawford here for Countdown. And look, your mob are over here. AC/DC, the lads themselves, chatting away in a corner here at Covent Garden. I'm going to get Angus and Bon to tell me about your tour over here. What have you blokes been doing? Can I get you to come down and have a look at our most attractive part of town?
I thought this was it.
By the time AC/DC arrive in London, the whole landscape of the music business has already begun to change. Punk rock has come in. It's the new sensation in London.
This is the sound. This is the sound of the suburbs. This is the sound.
As critics frothed over the Sex Pistols and The Clash, AC/DC were mocked as wallaby rockers. But the lesson of the Easy Beats had been, hold your nerve and don't change for anyone.
A lot of bands start to change because they think the world's changing around them, and so they should try and keep up because people are going to stop liking who they are, so they've got to try and follow the trends. Big, big, big mistake, as shown by AC/DC. Their brand compass is rock solid in one direction, does not deviate by a centimetre.
The people that come to see us, we just give them the show we give the Australian people, and they took on to us without publicity, The publicity caught up to us, not us to them. Yep.
Are you rich, though? I mean, are you making the bread?
Yep. Sure are.
I just bought Big Ben.
They started out at a tiny dive in Hammersmith called the Red Cow. In the first set, the usual 2 men and a dog were there. But by the second set, the place was packed. Literally, during the intermission, people were going out to phone boxes and ringing their friends.
They were a machine. They were an absolute... Even back then, they were a machine, and Bon Scott had a magic to him that you can't put your finger on it. It was just natural. It was... I hate to use the phrase the X Factor, but he had it, He had just charisma just oozing out of him, and he was the most social of the lot of them. And he lent me money, which I never gave him back. I still owe him 10 quid.
Bon called himself the lightning bolt between AC and DC.
Hello, this is Bon from AC/DC.
They had found a frontman that the world would come to love.
Do you know if you ever actually talked to Bon and you gave him his address, he would actually write to you. He used to write hundreds and hundreds of cards. It was amazing, man. Really friendly, ever so nice guy.
Every band's got a writer. The writer is the promoter, supplies the backstage with whiskey, wine, beer, sandwiches, whatever. So when you have your guests, nobody has to pay for anything, right? So I was like, knock on the door, and I turn around, and there's Bon, right? He says, hey, mate, can I come on in? I says, yeah, sure, man, yeah, come on in. And the thing that was really cool about Bon is he brought his own bottle, and he brought his own glass.
The gigs got bigger and wilder, and as punk rock wilted, AC/DC's sound literally shook the foundations of old Europe.
We did a couple of nights in Glasgow that were just insane because Glasgow Apollo had this reputation for just being a crazy gig. And the balcony was designed in such a way that it moved like aeroplane wings. They got to be able to move. And this balcony would shift 18 inches. And I remember the balcony was moving so much that I ran back into the corridor. This is going to collapse.
When it was time for an album, the boys always came home to Albert's. George and Harry would produce their first 8 albums, using the formula of recording the intensity of the band raw and live.
It amazed me that Angus did all the same stuff in the studio that he would, and it was deafening, just deafening.
At the end of that take, his headphones flew off his head and he was on the floor spinning around. And, you know, the amp had smoke coming out of it, and at the end of the take, like the amp died.
In this Sydney studio, a seismic shift in rock music was taking place. A distinct Australian sound produced by migrant kids made good. One day, the great guitar bands of the world, from Metallica to the Foo Fighters, would wonder how the Albert's guitar sound was created. It came down to being fearless. Next, Ted Albert signed Rose Tattoo.
Bleeding up here for you. You gotta give me something, yeah?
We used to think that our volume was sonic exploration, actually, that we were communicating with the gods, that we were trying to create a conduit that took people, dare I say, transcendentally, into another place. And it's the intensity that we tried to capture on tape.
They may have traded the grog for green tea these days, but back then, record labels wouldn't even meet Rose Tattoo, let alone sign them.
But George and Harry went to Ted and said, we've found this really eccentric, different bunch of people. And I think Ted knew better than to judge us by what we look like, to say, OK, I'm listening, I'm not looking. And what I'm hearing, so that related to him. He said, I love your sound. I love what you do.
Albert's took the risk and signed the Tats. George and Harry knew the band had the makings of at least one great song and got to work.
30 days in the county jail.
We realised that there was a process going on in the studio, and it was quite magical. And I remember George sitting there with his guitar, with Mick, and they're just jamming. And then all of a sudden, and that's almost a John Lee Hooker. You know, we've got a book and it's a boogie thing. And it's all of a sudden, Bad Boy went from being, you know, like ka-chunk, 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 into this swinging like zap, bap, 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 and it had the hook. Once that riff happened, we knew how to sing it.
I thought that the Angels had some heavy dudes at their gigs compared to the Tats, nothing. People used to cross the other side of the street if they saw them. I used to walk around with Angry. It was like partying in the seas.
Albert's, Van Young, AC/DC set a standard for the way that Australians approach their rock and roll, the way we We do it here. Rose Tattoo, Alberts again. And they were riding the wave and taking us with them, you know, singing about us.
The Alberts rock sound was established. But a golden age of pop was also beckoning. George and Harry's Flash in the Pan was building a strong international following and predicting the sounds of the 80s quirk pop.
Wonder why it's getting cold at night. Must be getting old. Looks like I'm gonna have to wait a while. What the hell am bored?
At the same time, Albert's former sheet metal worker and spunk in residence, John Paul Young, was charting in Europe and needed a follow-up hit.
I mean, thank God for Standing in the Rain, because it gave us a direction, even though it was only a B-side. You know, but because the Germans liked it, it gave everybody a bit of a pointer. Oh, so this is the way we should go.
Quite often an idea would lie around for God knows how long, because we couldn't somehow finish it or fake it, whatever was needed, you know. Love Is in the Air was an example of that.
When George came up with a riff that climbed to the chorus, the idea that had laid around for years suddenly came to life.
Down, 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 there, 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 you know. Ah, yeah, of course, Love Is in the Air.
Love is in the air. Love is in the air.
Oh. George said to me, I've tried putting words in there. I don't know. I don't think it suits. He said, just do something. Just dum-de-dum something. So that's where that came from.
George said, take all the mixes up to Ted and play them to Ted and let him choose.
Well, he got to hear all the stuff we did, you know, and he'd be going through things like, you know, so like that one. So you knew straight away, you know, I remember when you heard Love Is in the Air, he was like, he was beside himself. And I can see why too.
Love is in the air.
Love Is in the Air would be Vanda and Young's greatest pop success, and for many, their most memorable. It's been covered more than 300 times.
But it's something that I must believe in, and it's there when I call out your name.
But not even Shirley Bassey in the Bahamas could nail it like John Paul Young.
Love is in the air. Love is in the air.
It had taken George and Harry years to crack Love Is in the Air. Same for Ted Albert, with his dream of making a film. It all came together one night out with his wife, Popsy.
Popsy had taken him to see this play, which looked quite fun, called Strictly Ballroom, which the Sydney Theatre Company had put on.
We loved it because it was so quirky and very funny, but very sort of stylish in its own way and quite, you know, different from anything we'd ever seen.
And apparently Ted sat up very straight in his seat and said, that's the movie I want to make.
Love is in the air. In the whisper of the tree.
Strictly Ballroom would mark a rebirth of Australian cinema in the 90s. Not that everybody saw that at the time.
And on came this video of Squick doing Love Is in the Air. I said, why are you dressed like that? He said, that is from the film. Well, that's not going to work. I can tell you right now, yeah? How wrong can one be?
From tattooed bad boys to baby-faced balladeers, Alberts was riding a wave of success. But no family is unbreakable. And at Alberts, the Angels would be the ones to prove it.
Went down to Santa Fe, wearing wild
for all time, I will regret what happened. We left Albert's. It was a huge mistake.
Inspired by the success of AC/DC, the Angels were desperate to crack the international market. But their manager, John Woodruff, felt Albert's weren't moving quickly enough. When he signed a deal with American label CBS, it didn't end well.
One of the most unpleasant meetings I've ever had was after George called me. I was down in Melbourne. I said, what are you guys doing? And I came back and had a chat with Harry and George, and they were pretty upset with what happened.
Woodruff offered Albert's a share in the deal, but Ted was angry. The Angels were cast off the Albert's label.
Rick and I don't think we fought hard enough. We should have fought harder to can that idea. But there's also this thing like we could conquer the world. And, you know, AC/DC and George and Harry were always talking about that, you know, about the world. And we went for it too, but we didn't have them anymore.
The Angels would have some success in America, but the long way to the top hadn't got any shorter, only lonelier. AC/DC knew there were no shortcuts. They landed on the beaches of America, ready for the hand-to-hand combat of what they'd been through in Australia and Europe. Their first tour of America was in a station wagon, but they did 200 shows, often 2 gigs per night. Taking America was an enormous job. Bon felt like they were winning the battle.
So many ideas for songs and so many good riffs. It's going to get better and better. I can't see an end to it, you know. It's like infinity rock and roll.
Back home, Ted wired cash to keep them afloat. But he was facing pressure from his chief financial officer, Brian Byrne. The campaign had been running for 5 years now, and AC/DC still had not returned a profit on their investment. Ted had complete faith in the band. He asked FIFA to fly the Albert's flag as they performed a landmark gig in the US.
July of 1978, I go to see them at Oakland's, Day on the Green. 60, 70,000 people, I can't remember exactly. They're the opening act for Aerosmith. Unbelievable. The most amazing show. They got out there at like 10 o'clock in the morning and they killed it. And the crowd just went nuts.
At the time, Aerosmith was the biggest band in America, with rock god frontman Steven Tyler and lead guitarist Joe Perry.
Do I love Steven? Yeah. But, you know, honestly, Joe Perry can't stand up to Angus. Sorry, Joe, but it's the truth. So that's gonna hurt, but, you know, probably he'll hate me. But he hates me already, so it doesn't really matter. The truth is that Angus is fucking amazing. That's all I can tell you. He's of the people, for the people, by the people. Just like Abe Lincoln said it, he gives it 100% high energy. Perfect name, AC/DC, electric.
By 1978, word of AC/DC's power as a live act was spreading. It got the attention of Atlantic Records' young new president, Jerry Greenberg.
When you see a crowd reaction and then you see a band live like that, let's just say the light bulb went off in my head and I got it. I said, this could be our next big band.
Greenberg's plan was simple: get AC/DC on radio. For him, that meant a new producer to get their music to sound America-friendly. George and Harry graciously stepped aside, as Ted had done for the Easy Beats 12 years earlier. In came Mutt Lange to give their music a new commercial skin.
I just knew that if we had made the right record, if we can get the right record made with these guys, they were going to be enormous.
His wish was about to come true. Bon was working on a song about the relentless hard graft of touring America, what Angus called the highway to hell. Bon's sometime girlfriend, Pam Swain, was on the road with the band at the time.
Bon was really excited about Highway to Hell. So the moment I got on the bus, headphones are on and we go through all the songs, and that was terrific. Because I knew they'd been struggling to find the hit as well. That was a big pressure on them. He was writing letters going, oh, I've got to get a single, I've got to get a single, I've got to get a single. What's a single? Who knows? Who knows what the audience will like?
Highway to Hell was the single and the album that woke American radio up to AC/DC.
I just got a new stereo system in my office, right? I turned it up as loud as I could. I actually cracked the window in my office. Oh my God, what a record that was.
Jim Delahant ran A&R at Atlantic. First he signed AC/DC, then the Tats.
I liked the roughness. They were rougher than AC/DC, actually. Raw, yeah, very raw. That was another Australian thing. I mean, it's like Australians can take a rock and make something out of it. Oh, they were really good.
And I heard that record, I said, great, let's do it. And we signed them.
Jerry Greenberg was willing to do anything to sign them, even take his clothes off.
He realized that there was a raunchy side of this band that hopefully he could get across over there. I mean, Rock and Roll Outlaw and Bad Boy for Love were really interesting songs that rocked.
The Tats inspired a generation of American bands like Motley Crue and Guns N' Roses.
The Yanks don't get it because they don't understand authenticity. They don't play like that. No one attacks a guitar like in Australia.
The AC/DC juggernaut was now rocking at top speed. But the hard living was taking its toll on Bon Scott.
On the surface, all his dreams are suddenly coming true. Highway to Hell has become a platinum album in America. It's just taken AC/DC to exactly where they wanted to go. And the very next album is going to be the big one, the really big one.
In January 1980, the boys were working on what would become the Back in Black album when Bon called FIFA at Albert's.
He told me he was excited. He'd heard all the riffs that Malcolm and Angus were coming up with for the new album, and he couldn't wait to get into the studio. He just said, this is going to be a big one. He said, some of their ideas are amazing.
It was the last time she heard Bon's voice.
Lead singer of the rock group AC/DC was found dead last night in a parked car in South London. Scotland Yard said the body of Bon Scott was discovered by a friend who had left him in the car hours earlier to sober up after a day's drinking.
I was in the office when George and Harry came in and told me that they'd heard about Bon. He loved the whole Albert family. He used to call it his family. And he became a really close friend of mine over the years, and I was only looking at some letters yesterday. I've got about 20 letters that I've kept over the years. And one of his last lines was, I always smile when I think of you. And I thought, that's exactly how I feel about him.
The young brothers thought Bon's death could be the end of AC/DC. Atlantic pushed hard for the band to keep going, but Ted Albert told the boys that he would support them, whatever they decided to do. At the funeral, Bon's dad, Chick, encouraged Malcolm and Angus to find another singer and keep going. And so another chapter began.
It was just something they just all sat down and they said, let's just do something, because otherwise they were just going to peter out, I suppose. And they just said, let's go and rehearse some singers and see what happened.
They always had great musical intuition, but no one expected them to go with the singer from 1970s Top of the Pops band, Geordie.
It was just a strange day, you know, I was downstairs playing pool and now I'm upstairs with all these singers.
One of our crew guys was downstairs playing with him and had said to him, well, what are you doing here anyhow? He said, I was told to come here to audition, you know, to the band AC/DC. He said, well, that's upstairs, you know.
Hello, this is Brian Johnson from AC/DC, and you're watching Countdown 81 right across Australia. See you, man. Fingers sport.
I had said to Malcolm after we had heard him sing, I said, he'll be able to hit those high notes. Yeah. And so, and he did, he hit those high notes.
Brian Johnson became part of the family, making Back in Black. Then came the tour. It was time to face the home fans, where the long way to the top had started.
When I saw them at the Sydney Showgrounds, the first gig with Brian out front, the way they handled that gig and handled the transition between the two singers, man, I don't think any band's done it any better.
Back in Black did what Malcolm Young had set out to achieve from day one. It made AC/DC the biggest rock and roll band on earth.
Malcolm just knew what he wanted from that band or what he wanted to achieve with the band, and he never veered from that. He and Angus started it, and then with Bon, you know, it just took off, and then with Brian coming in, you know, it's just been an amazing journey.
It was the ultimate triumph for Ted Albert, who had focused his life's work on building a musical family around the people he believed in.
He put his money behind us, he took a big risk, and he never put pressure on us at all. He was a real player. We've worked with other record companies since then in different countries and everything else, but I don't think we've ever met anyone who was so genuine and honest and that you could trust as a person. And we certainly owe Ted a lot, because we may not have been here today if it wasn't for a guy like Ted.
It cut both ways. Ted Albert's dreams started with the Easy Beats. 15 years later, AC/DC and the Australian sound of the suburbs now ruled the world. In 1990, as AC/DC toured the Razor's Edge album, Ted sat down to write one of his regular letters to Malcolm.
Dear Mal, I'm completely blown away by the new album. I love it. In fact, I had subwoofers installed in my car in honor of it. Congratulations on songs, sounds, and performances. Thank you for our long association and the success that you have brought to my company. My very best, Ted Albert.
A week later, Ted died of a heart attack. But the music lives on.
Ted's legacy is, it's many things to many people, but his most important legacy, I think, in the music field is what he did for rock and roll and giving Australian rock and roll respectability worldwide.
Countryman